Greetings to everybody at Church Universal and Triumphant. Namaste. I'm Ben with Holy Orders at CUT and the Summit Lighthouse. I also want to reach out to people in other parts of the IM activity. I've been following their material online in addition to studying Mother, of course. And I wanted to touch base with people because it had been a while since I had posted anything online. Not sure where to start. I've collected some of your questions over the course of the last couple of weeks. It's been, I think, probably a month and a half since I posted on my YouTube account. As a reminder to everybody, information is available on YouTube. If you go to the account Ben Turner 214 and you look at my playlist selections, you will find two playlists relevant to Holy Orders. One is called The Summit Lighthouse. It begins with the words The Summit Lighthouse. And those postings consist primarily of videos posted by the ranch. And what I've done is I've organized those videos and recurated them, making some commentaries on the sides of the specific videos of Mother. And so if I come across a piece of scripture or a comment that is relevant to people with theosophical and Gnostic interests, I've added that material to the side of the video. In many instances, it's just a clarification of what Elizabeth is discussing. In some instances, it's, I don't want to say new information, it's a reappearance of information and a rearticulation of ancient wisdom. So I would refer you to those comments if you're interested in knowing more about what it is that I'm working on at the moment and incorporating that into your own spiritual practice. So for the purpose of archiving material, that is really my main emphasis at this juncture. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about astrology today so that we have that on file. And let's see here if I can find my book. And I also wanted to discuss the 5 Dhyani Buddhas and related Padmasambhava information in addition to that. Let's see where my book is first, though. It should be... Nope, it's not here. As always, I'm down at least one book. Let's see. Oh, here it is. Let's see what I can come up with. Now, some of the planets, for astrologers who use the prophet system, that's what I'll call it for the time being. I know that there are many astrologers in the world, and astrology has undergone many iterations, but for the time being, I will refer to just two systems. One is the Llewellyn George system, and the other is the prophet system, which differs slightly from the George system. This is really the book that I have used for years. And if you read my information about Elizabeth Clare Prophet, you'll discover that I really have had Mother around me for my entire life. And as we all have, I am acutely aware that my relationship to Mother goes back, as far as I can remember, into my own early years, ancient history, and so forth. But I became a devotee of the church in, I think it was around probably 2010, and you can read more about my story. There was actually what I consider to be a divine intervention in my life at a certain point when I was subjected to very bad criminal activity in Maine, and it was a situation in which police could not or would not interfere, or rather intervene in the activity, and you can read about that additionally. And I think there are reports of the Virgin Mother appearing to soldiers and so forth in times of war. And so what happened to me, I think, is a bit similar to that. I think that Elizabeth Clare Prophet had the spiritual mandate to rescue me, and that's just the reality of the situation. And certainly through the assistance of the church. But that's when I became dedicated to holy orders. So that's an important element to my story, a very vital actually element. And if you read it, it is. I try to think about it spiritually. It's a very traumatizing story if you really read deeply into it and attempt to understand the emotional fallout and to navigate it psychologically. But you can also look at it sort of at a distance and recognize its profundity and also relevance to my work and my spiritual path, which ties into the spiritual paths of everybody involved in the church. So I would refer you to that information on my Holy Orders website page. And I intend to write a book about Elizabeth Clare Prophet's intervention in my life. The word intervention, I think, bears a lot of negative connotation because I'm an advocate against force and coercion in the mental health system. I do not believe in modern psychiatry, and I do not support locked ward mental hospitals and actively attempt to close them. And I think when I hear the word intervention, I often think of family members trying to sign up other family members with whom they disagree to the locked ward mental hospital, which unfortunately the U.S. government is attempting to authorize. It's a disgrace, it's a devastation, and nobody really discusses it, with the exception of me and a few people who happen to be connected to the United Nations. And as much as the United Nations fails us and is fraught with problems as that organization can be, some of the international human rights lawyers have been able to network a bit. But yeah, the word intervention, when I say intervention, I mean spiritual intervention, and really what I mean is a rescue. It's not your fault if you're the victim of crime, and that's one of the elements that psychiatrists don't understand at all. Someone is screaming and crying, there's probably a reason, and it's not necessarily an organic reason or something that individual has done to himself or herself. So I propose a law enforcement and governmental model in which people are protected from being called mentally ill, and they're protected from force and coercion in the mental health system. I want to clarify what I mean by intervention. It's really a spiritual intervention or a rescue. I would say it's a miracle. In my instance, it's a miracle. I think that one person can undertake to enter the life and accept responsibility, or hold the balance for another individual in a way that provides that individual with access to salvation. And truly, those forms of intervention are miraculous in many respects. In my instance, the intervention was entirely etheric, and certainly something that I can discuss in additional detail and want to document thoroughly, and should. That's the other concern I have with how burdened I am within the legal system at the moment, is that there's all this fantastic information that I uncover on behalf of the church that is directly relevant to IM activity, Gnostics of the world and so forth, Buddhism everywhere, and yet that material passes me by. Certainly it'll return to me, and it's the burning bush of knowledge. It is never truly consumed. It will never leave us, but it is very frustrating to have those moments slip away. So I'm looking to be safely domiciled somewhere in which I can properly chronicle everything that I witness and experience. So anyway, here's this book, okay? So this is my early astrology book. I wanted you to see that, and I can't believe that it would be out of print. You're actually seeing it backwards. That's kind of interesting. I'll have to maybe see if I can tweak the video. This is a book by an astrologer named Llewellyn George, and it's called The New A to Z Horoscope Maker and Delineator. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the Bible of astrology. Okay, that's not even going to be helpful to you, is it? Yeah, it's entirely my screen. It's entirely backwards. If I can tweak this, rather reverse the image, you'll be able to see it. A to Z, Llewellyn George. He's the god of Western astrology. So pick yourself up a copy, and highly recommended. Now, why I'm here is because Mother's astrology is a bit different as I uncover it. Part of progressive revelation. It doesn't matter if she wrote it in the 50s or she uncovered it in the 60s or 70s. Whenever Summit started to suggest that there were slightly different interpretations of the exaltations, for instance. Let me discuss that for just a bit. Each sign of the zodiac is ruled by a planet. So if you're born a Gemini, you have Sun in Gemini. The Sun was in the sign of Gemini when you were born. And if you were born in Taurus, the Sun was in Taurus when you were born. But Taurus and Gemini are ruled by different planets. Taurus is ruled by Venus. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So not only are you, everybody is primarily influenced by the Sun, correct? The secondary influence, though, would be the ruling planet of the sign, the solar sign in which you were born. So Taurus people are not only are going to come across as having a lot of Venusian influence, and Gemini people and Virgo people will seem to be very mercurial because they're ruled by Mercury, and so forth. One planet, actually not one planet, per the chart. There is some debate. For instance, some people think that, well, rather one planet per sign, because Venus rules both Libra and Taurus, fixed air and cardinal, rather fixed earth and cardinal air, and Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo. But some astrologers believe, and I don't see it written in Prophet yet. When I read Prophet, I don't see it there yet. Some, although very well could be, some astrologers believe that Vulcan, a hypothetical planet, is, or what we call an esoteric planet or a discrete planet, I suppose. I'm not really sure what the term is. I used to know it. I will give it to you when I locate it again. But it is really a hypothetical planet, and we don't see it in physical reality. But some astrologers say it doesn't really matter, it's still there. And the influence is still felt, and that is associated with Virgo. So in that system, and that is a valid belief, according to, very serious astrologers. You can, takes on astrology are going to differ from astrologer to astrologer, although most people believe that the rules are pretty much immutable. Most of the, there are very few people who argue that Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn, for instance. Now, as Venus goes through the 12 signs, so does the Sun. All the planets go through the 12 signs. The outer-lying planets go through at an incredibly slow snail's pace, and the planets closest to the Sun go very rapidly around the 12 signs. Venus, as it goes through the various signs, is going to have positive positionings with respect to the sign in which it is located, and it's going to have negative positions. Now, the thing about astrology is that all of the planets matter at any given time. So even if Venus were poorly aspected at one juncture, it doesn't mean that your car is going to blow up, or you're going to fall off a cliff, or a comet is on its way, anything like that. You have to look at the entire chart. You have to look at the influence of the other planets. And the angles and so forth. I won't get into that yet. But Venus has a very powerful position within its signs of rulership. So Venus is best positioned in Libra and in Taurus. It is, as I said, it can be oppositional and a challenge to have Venus appear in the sign directly across from Taurus, which is Scorpio. Not a great position for Venus. But there can also be growth and a vibration that encourages change as a result of that opposition as well. Like Taurus and Scorpio, yeah, they're opposed, but oppositions can also can form strong bonds and results in friendships. For instance, Pisces and Virgos get along very well, but they are in opposition to each other on the chart. They get along because they are, they're both feminine and or negatively charged. You can say that as well. And Earth and water are complementary triplicities. So, but Venus, right, is not really doing very well in the sign of Scorpio. Now, when a planet is across from, in opposition to, the sign in which it is domiciled, in which it has rulership, then it is called being in its fall. Venus is in its fall in Scorpio, and then there are something called exaltations. Now, Venus is best positioned in its two signs of rulership. So to make it easier, Venus and Mercury kind of are complicated because they rule two signs, but Saturn only rules Capricorn. Before the discovery of Uranus, however, Saturn also ruled Aquarius, but that's getting kind of into more complex astrology. However, you can use that as a thought form. If you're an Aquarius and you are aware of Uranus, the Uranian influence in your life, it might also help you to develop an awareness that, well, prior to the discovery of Uranus, we were very much influenced by the same planet that ruled Capricorn. And Aquarians do have a real Saturnian vibration in many respects, or that energy is very Saturnian. So bear that in mind if you'd like to do so, but I won't get into that quite yet. So planets, houses of rulership, rather planets rule signs. So Saturn rules Capricorn. When someone comes to me and they've never had their chart done, their natal chart done, that's one of the first things I think that takes them, is that they're not simply Gemini, or they're not simply Sagittarius. I start to talk about Jupiter right away when I meet a Sag, and a lot of people don't. They're not necessarily aware that they're ruled by Jupiter, or Pisceans aren't necessarily aware, if you're not involved in astrology, that they're ruled by Neptune. Maybe many people are from reading the horoscope. It might be the case, but so right. So there's Saturn is best positioned in Capricorn. And so Saturn is most powerful and effective, generally put, when it is in the sign of Capricorn. Now, there's also something called exaltations, and exaltations are the second best location. And if you're an astrologer and you sit down, you understand what all of the rulerships are. When you read the and you understand triplicities, and you understand the cardinal signs and the mutables, the difference between the cardinal signs and mutable signs and the fixed signs, and so on. Then when you discover what the exaltations are, it does make sense based upon what you have already learned, and so on. Now, the typical exaltations in the George system are as follows. The moon is exalted in Taurus. Mercury is exalted in Virgo. Venus is exalted in Pisces. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. Saturn is exalted in Libra. Uranus is exalted in Scorpio. And elsewhere in George, which I will check, it also lists Aquarius on one of the charts, but not on the other chart. Neptune exalted in Leo. Pluto exalted in Pisces. So Pluto and Venus exalted in Pisces according to George. North Node, Gemini, South Node, Sagittarius. I wanted to point out that this system differs from what Mother teaches. And yet is similar enough to be recognizable as typical Western astrology. Mother, I'm not referring to the cosmic clock, and I think that a lot of people at the church at Summit are familiar with the cosmic clock or are striving to be, and I feel that that's a part of progressive revelation as well. Cosmic clock, and Mother will talk in very complex terms about the axes and lines, and that is not, when she assigns basically clock directions to the astrological wheel, that is not really part of modern astrology. It is something that either has been handed down to her through the messengerial mantle or is part of a theosophic tradition. I will give you more information about that as well. But the cosmic clock should not be confused with the zodiacal wheel. It's not the same thing. It is based on the lines of the zodiac, however. But to the best of my awareness, that is something that is unique to CUT. I will give you more information if I find otherwise. And septenary planets, which I will talk about next time. That is interesting. And let's see. And when you refer to cardinal fixed immutable, you are referring to quadrature. Triplicity refers to the elements. exaltation degrees that's fascinating to uncover too. Once you learn a little bit more, you will make good use of that information. I can't find the mother off the top of my head, but I can in the other book. Let me get that to you. Okay, guys, check this out. First of all, I want everybody to see that I'm wearing my Bobcat shirt. Okay? When I die and I'm in the ground, I want you guys to bury me in my Bobcat shirt. The Bobcats are Montana, which is why I say that. Look at this. This is a nice shirt. It's all embroidered. You know? Yeah, I just got it for a couple dollars somewhere too. I don't quite remember. Okay. This book, The Astrology of the Four Horsemen, by Elizabeth Clare Prophet. I bought this. It's a pretty good sized paperback. I bought this in the Amazon for used from either someone in the church or someone else who readily shipped it to me. And a lot of it has to do with the Reagan 80s and what was going on at the time when she wrote this. And it has to do with specific, I won't get into it, specific important critical angles that occurred in the 80s and 90s. And I can tell you what those are if you want to look back. I think there was a grand square that occurred. But she talks about the natal chart of the United States. Does God condemn astrology? So at first I thought, well, this book is not going to contain relevant information to me at all because it's outdated, and I don't really care about the war or the Cold War really at this juncture, so I'm not going to follow it. But interestingly, two things. One is the book bears all sorts of additional information that is vital to students of astrology, particularly if you're interested in understanding the nuances between CUT astrology and George. But this book, conjunction of Mars, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune in Capricorn, which is quite a conjunction. That's quite a pileup, you know. And that occurred in 1988. So she discusses this in detail. You know, with regard to what was occurring on the planet at the time, and she refers to those planets as the horsemen. So with Mars being the trigger horse, to the best of my awareness. Right, the four riders. So when she talks about the astrology of the four horsemen, she's referring to the four planets in that pileup I mentioned that occurred in 1988. So that's interesting information. And, you know, she talks about Kuwait oil prices and so forth in the 90s. When I first picked it up, I looked at it and I just saw Kuwait, and I think maybe before that there was something about Reagan. But if you flip through it, you will find that it does have, it contains timely and relevant information, irrespective of whether or not you care about the 80s. You know, and there's the birth chart of the United States. She says she's saying April 30th, 1789. Check this out. This is important too. United States of America conceptual chart. All right. She's not saying the U.S. was born on July 4th, 1776 at 5:13 p.m. She's saying that it was conceived at that time. United States of America conceptual chart. And then she's saying the birth chart is in April of 89. Can you guys see that? Oh yeah, you guys can see pretty well. But I mean, I will show you the planets. Or rather, if someone wants to look at this, certainly I'll make a copy and send it along to you. You can tell me what you find. April 30th, 1789, and she says that is when, at 1:30 p.m., when George Washington took the oath of office as her, meaning the country's first president, at Federal Hall in New York City. The United States natal sun is at Taurus. Her moon is at Cancer, and her ascendant is at Virgo. The sun is conjoined Venus at 2 degrees. Taurus sextile conjoined Venus, 2 degrees. Taurus sextile the moon and trine the ascendant. That's a nice position. Venus is known as the lesser fortune. So good conjoining of planets there. This configuration is the basis for a stable, practical government, according to what she says about the birth chart. Okay. Republic of Iraq birth chart. I'll just read it to you, quoting. I didn't really look at this before. 341, page 341. Figure 35. The Republic of Iraq was born at 5 a.m. Baghdad time, BGT, July 14, 1958, when a military junta overthrew the pro-Western monarchy. Iraq's sun is at 21 degrees Cancer, its moon is at 17 degrees Gemini, and its ascendant is at 19 degrees Cancer. So the moon, Iraq's moon conjuncts its ascendant almost exactly. It's, the orb for the moon is larger than the rest of the planets. The T-square formed by Mars at 25 degrees Aries, opposed to Jupiter at 22 degrees Libra, and square to the Sun at 21 degrees Cancer, shows that Iraq's leaders would have a propensity to take decisive military action against anyone or anything that threatens their domestic security or international ambitions. So that's her interpretation of the natal chart, and it looks like there's quite a triangle, rather a trine. Aries, late Aries and Cancer. No, that's not a trine. Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm looking at the moment. That's okay. But trying to see this, the moon. (21 degrees Cancer) is ascendant at. Okay. First thing you come to in the Iraqi chart is the moon. It's the very, very first thing you hit in the ascendant. After the ascendant. Okay. Interesting. Transiting Neptune conjoined Canada's midheaven and opposed to Canada's Sun and Uranus. Okay. Right, and so but with the exaltations for Mother, Pluto is exalted in Leo, first of all. Septenary planets is interesting. It bears interest and it's relevant to advanced astrologers because there was a day where no Pluto was known or existed, and there was a time when Uranus wasn't around. Or, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto are new developments, relatively speaking. So when those transitions occurred, most of the people decided, well, George really has the right information, and I think he does have the right information. And I think that Mother has good points as well when she says, well, I don't think Pluto is exalted in Venus. I think that it's really in Leo. Yeah, that makes sense. And the other point that Mother makes is that we talk about the Uranian exaltation in Aquarius, and she states that Mercury is exalted in Aquarius, whereas in the George system, Mercury is exalted in Virgo. There is no exaltation of Mercury in Aquarius in the George system at all. And as an astrologer, when I read that, because I've been working with George for such a long time, I read Mercury. When she's saying Mercury in Aquarius, I was like, it doesn't quite. It didn't hit a nerve. It just struck me as a bit odd that would be the choice. And then I thought, well, it does make sense because you're talking about someone who really thinks that, well, it's a fact that the age of Aquarius is incoming. So communication in the age of Aquarius is phenomenally prominent and important. And I suppose it's interesting as well that Uranus is which rules Aquarius, is the higher octave of Mercury. There are octaves. The personal planets have octaves within the intergenerational planets, the outer lying planets that were only recently discovered, comparatively speaking. So Venus is the lower octave of Neptune, which is the higher vibration of Venus. Mercury is the lower octave of Uranus, which is the higher vibration, and Mars is the lower octave of Pluto, which is the higher vibration. So maybe, it does make sense that she would position Aquarius there, but the George system does not. In addition to Uranus, which I saw on that one page as being exalted, he says, Uranus exaltation. Right, he says, right, in his system, Uranus is Aquarius and Scorpio for exaltation, and there is no planet exalted in. If you ignore that second point that he made on the second chart, where he doesn't mention Aquarius, in George, there is no exaltation in the sign of Aquarius, and but Neptune is in its fall in Aquarius. See that here. What happens with Mother is that Virgo does not have an exalted planet, to the best of my understanding, and I will update that. So in other words, Mother says Mercury is exalted in Aquarius. George says it's exalted in Virgo. Mother says there's no exaltation in Virgo. George says on one chart that there's no exaltation in Aquarius, and the other chart that Uranus is exalted in Aquarius. But the only planet possibly exalted in Aquarius, according to George, is Uranus, the ruler. And Mercury in Virgo, right? So Mother moves it out of Virgo, in other words, into Aquarius, and Pluto, Pisces no longer has two. That goes to Leo, and her Neptune. That's a good question too. We say Leo, and I think she says, I will look it up for you right now so that you know. And some of you will already be aware from having studied directly under Mother and maybe not having studied George. But I will find it for you. This is really indispensable information, and it is interesting that it does differ. I can find it right now. Yeah, she says Cancer, okay? Neptune exalted in Cancer. And for us in Cancer is Jupiter. There are two in Cancer for Mother. She says Jupiter and Neptune both exalted in Cancer. Right here in this section. That's totally different from the George system. What I like about that idea is that Jupiter is the former ruler of Pisces, so they're both water, and it would make sense that Jupiter would be exalted in a water sign. And in the George system, it is exalted in Cancer. Before the discovery of Neptune, it was Jupiter that ruled Pisces, which is a very intriguing concept if you understand Sagittarius. It really ties the signs of Sagittarius and Pisces together. If you understand what those two signs are all about, it does make sense. So I wanted to just point that out. Two systems, but very similar. I mean, it cannot be said that Elizabeth was not directly using Western principles and typical theory. And I think I'd like to see who her forebear, her direct forebear was, if there was a forebear other than George. It'd be interesting to study. Now I will figure it out.